Good morning and welcome everyone to our Global Chamber Globinar. Today we have an incredible speaker. Philip Auerbach is going to be speaking to us, and he heads up Auerbach International for Translations. And we know that words and their meanings are significant, and getting them right is important, is particularly in business and avoiding wars. And he'll talk about that a little bit. So welcome to Global Chamber. We are located in 525 metros around the world. I'm physically located here in Atlanta. My name is Dana Austin. I'm the Executive Director of Global Chamber Atlanta. And we are also in 195 countries through artificial intelligence and people. We make soft introductions and connect people to help your businesses thrive and to make an impact here on our world. So our speaker today is none other than Philip Auerbach, who has a very rich, interesting history of his life and business and living around the world. And I'd like to start by asking a question of you, Philip. On the translation side for your business, Auerbach International, how did you get into that industry? And then we'll move forward.
Well, thank you, Dana. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. The translation business is one that is sort of a mystery to most people. A lot of people understand real estate, they understand retailing, but translations are a mystery. Like, what happens? You put something in here, it comes out here, just like instant hamburgers, and that's not quite the way it works. I will show you, how basically it happens. Let me very briefly tell you about the history of our company. When was this? Over 30 years ago, I had a marketing consultancy with many other clients, and through a friend, I was contacted by a group of professional translators, and they asked, could you market us? And it fit with my background because I've got a master's in marketing from Thunderbird. So it's international business that way. At the time, I think I had studied 6 languages. I now have studied 8. So that fit. And I speak pretty well, at this point is somewhat rusty, but French and Japanese. Anyway, it fit with my background. I decided to give it a go. So very quickly, please put in the chat, where do you think this group of translators were who said that they wanted to be marketed? One hint, they were not in Europe.
So you're wanting us to put the city, the region, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The country, the region, where do you think this group of translators were? I see Japan, not in Europe. They were not in Europe. Canada, very good. Okay, well, they're in an elusive part of the world. And this is just, again, curiosity, how these things work. They're in, of all places, New Zealand, which is the land of 30 million white people who speak English only, and 3 million white people and 30 million sheep. And they were in New Zealand. This was way before the internet happened. So it was very fascinating. We no longer use this group, but we've evolved. And so, but anyway, that's how I started in this business.
And your connection and being an alum of Thunderbird is relevant for us as well, because as many of you know, or some that you may be hearing for the first time, Global Chamber headquarters is right there in Thunderbird in Phoenix, Arizona. So I don't know if there's a slogan for alum, like you say, go Thunderbirds or go Birds, but we're here. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So basically, that's how I started the business. And in terms of, again, I speak, I've studied 8 languages at this point, and I speak French and Japanese pretty well. The others I can read or understand in general. So our company, Auerbach International, we've got, as you can see, we've got 3 decades of experience. We've done over 2 billion words, written and spoken with A+ accuracy in 120 languages, with personal service, actually award-winning personal service, very fast delivery, great rates, and all subjects. So we specialize in some key subjects of automotive, medical healthcare, pharma, manufacturing, law, and IT. But as you will see, we can do absolutely any subject from, say, retailing to chemistry to zoology. Next slide, please. These are some very interesting stats that most people have absolutely no idea about. How much of the world does not speak English? That's almost 90% of internet users are outside the United States. 74% of the world internet users do not use English, which means the opportunities there are immense. And if you're not using English, then that can be problematic to communicate with your potential audience. And in addition, 41 million Latinos in this country speak Spanish at home. So if people are abroad and are marketing to the US, it's very important to know that the US is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world outside of Mexico. Next slide, please. This is also very critical. 76% of people prefer information in their native language, and 40% will never buy from websites whose information is not in their language. So how many billions of people are you missing by not translating your content? And most importantly, if you do not have sales support in native languages, 75% of people will not buy from you again. Thank you. These are the top 5 countries that basically insist on native language content, ranging from Taiwan, 94%, to Indonesia, 88%. And these are all, of course, in Eastern Asia. Next one. The types of content that serve non-English customers, pretty much you can read this, but people think, well, I can just do my website, but usually it's manuals, ads, but in addition, contracts, licensing agreements, training videos, social media, PowerPoints, product reviews. These are all important to support your international audiences. Next slide. Thank you. Now, this is where misconceptions start. A lot of people assume that Google Translate will work or Google Translate is good enough. Google Translate is good for certain purposes. It works well for technical information into 5 languages only: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Tagalog, which, as you probably know, is one of the Filipino languages. It is most useful to get the gist of what something says, to get the meaning of what something says from a foreign language into English. If you are going to use Google Translate for your websites, and please don't do it, but if you insist on doing it, as many people do, please do combine it with a professional translator review, either from us or from some other source. Do not use it in isolation. It does make very comical mistakes, very bad mistakes that can make you look foolish or wrong or very unprofessional. It is not good for conversational subjects and literature. It does not do cultural adaptation of any kind. It is not good for anything legal or medical or very, again, extremely precise. If you need precision, do not use it, because what % of risk are you willing to take? If you're willing to risk 10%, is that 10% going to kill someone? It also does not work well for most other languages: Dutch and German, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, the languages of indigenous languages of Africa, the indigenous languages of India, Eastern Europe, and East Asian languages. It does not work, so please do not use it. Well, again, it's to get the gist of what something says, but it should never be used for client-facing purposes unless you combine it with a professional translator review. I'd like to give one quick example of what happens if you use Google Translate. There's a Spanish word, chucho, and the word, if you put it in Google Translate, it will come out as the word mutt, M-U-T-T. So it does mean dog in El Salvador and Guatemala. In Honduras, it means stingy. In Argentina, it means a cold chill. In Chile, the word chucho means jail. And in Mexico, it means skilled or clever. So one word has all of these meanings. This is exactly why Google Translate cannot be used for cultural adaptation, because the machine cannot think. You need people, you need translators to use the right meaning of words like that. Next slide, please. Okay. So some of these illusions. Let's start, well, the top ones. my cousin, friend, neighbor, coworker, my person down the hall, my son or daughter who used to live abroad can easily do translations. Yes and no. If it's something simple, maybe so. If it's something about travel, a lot of the pocket translators that people have are good for travel. Where is the church? Where is the station? Does this dress come in blue? That sort of thing. That's very conversational. That's what those things are for. Those pocket translators are for. And if you've got something very simple, yes, maybe these amateurs can translate, but absolutely they're not good at translating anything technical. Those of you who studied other languages in high school or whatever, you probably did not learn the terminology for real estate or telecom or software or wine in the languages that you studied. And that's why amateurs and non-professionals cannot do it well, at least. And you may lose the relationships, you may break the friendships if you ask them to do it. The other myth is that Google Translate is good enough. Again, not really. I gave you one example of again, acculturation term that doesn't work. Just a technical term, for example, the word wafer slicing. In French, it came out to be tranchage de gaufrette, and that's again through Google Translate. The proper word for a wafer is a plaquette, not gaufrette. Gaufrette is a waffle. Gaufrette is a little waffle or something like a small cake. So just that technical example does not quite work. Use the sentence, remove excess soil with a paper towel. Now that seems very straightforward, except in dentistry, the word soil is not anything on the ground, but anything that's left in your mouth. So again, if the machine doesn't know you're translating dentistry, and why would it? The very simple word would be totally wrong. And the final illusion, the final myth, our distributor or agent should do it. Many people rely on that solution, and it can work, but it risks a lot of uncertainty. We've seen over 30 years what happens when you rely on agents or distributors. They will often retranslate something the way they think it should be said, not the way you want it to be said. You are in the home office, you determine how you want your message conveyed. The agents and distributors will not, they may acculturate, but they will also change the meaning. They will drop sentences, they will add claims, they will add phrases. They especially will add claims for which you are liable. And you say, well, no, our contract says the distributor is liable. Well, that's fine. Just let someone sue you for malpractice or negligence or whatever, and see how fast the distributor may disappear. So ultimately, you are liable for that, or you can be liable for that. So if you do rely on distributors or agents, please request what is called, please request from your distributor or agent the version that that person has used, and ask for a back translation, which means we will translate it back into English for you, and then you can compare and see how different or how similar or how different they are. So this is very critical to do that. And again, they will often rewrite the text or make claims that you may not know about. I'll give you a very simple example. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll do it anyway. We sent a translation to a client of industrial saws. They had someone in their company review it. They printed the brochures. They sent them to their agents in Mexico. And the Mexican agent came back to the home office saying, this is absolutely horrendous. What happened? Makes no sense. And they came back to us, and the client came back to us, your translation is terrible. And said, well, really, can you show us what you printed? And they sent it to us, and that's fine. I said, well, this is what you sent us, but this is what we gave you. What happened in between? Oh, well, we showed it to Miguel, and he edited it. Splendid. Who's Miguel? Oh, well, Miguel works in our warehouse. Mm. Oh, so you relied on a person with a 4th grade education to translate technical terminology about saws into Spanish. These are kinds of things that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide, please.
Well, I'd like to interject since we're going to take some questions at this point. Thank you for really raising the awareness around the need for recognizing the languages that are spoken around the world. And when only less than 24%, I think it was, is in English. So we have to be able to communicate in the languages and provide documents. And as you said, customer support in the languages of the intended organizations around the world. So we do have representation on the Globinar today from around the world. We have people that are in the United States that are doing business, likewise overseas. So my question is about the back translation. I've had that experience in the healthcare industry, working in clinical trials, and we'd have to get patients to complete an informed consent in order to participate. And if it's in a different language, we'd have to get it translated. So we would utilize organizations like your own, but it also had to be back translated to be sure that it said and conveyed the very same message. Have you seen any faux pas for folks that did not follow that? And while you respond to that, we'll be taking questions. You're welcome to put them in the chat, or we'll take at least one or two more questions right after this before he continues.
Yes, I wish I could find these examples. I was looking for them yesterday, but they're buried in some documentation folder somewhere. But yes, we've seen just where words are, again, mistranslated or the meaning does not quite convey. You know, English has more words than any other language. And so we've got a lot of nuances. So sometimes it's the nuances that are not conveyed properly, but sometimes, again, it's just, it's just the meaning. The meaning is totally off. As I said in the beginning, with the example of the Soviet, this is an article in the Soviet Weekly magazine during communist times where it said there was an article said there will be an exhibition of 12,000 works by Soviet artists and sculptors in Moscow, and these were executed over the past 2 years. Well, again, words, one word changes the meaning dramatically.
It sure does. It surely does. We'd like to at least entertain a one or two questions before we continue on. So if someone wants to unmic themselves and or open your mic, unmic yourself, open your mic and feel free to raise any questions you may have at this time. And I did notice different comments in the sections and comment section. We're acknowledging those. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Philip, we met a couple of years ago at a Get Global conference in Long Beach.
Oh, and, yes.
Good to see you again. Yeah. I wanted to know what, other than giving some examples, have you found any good way to help people get around or overcome the block of somebody in the warehouse knows Spanish, so they can translate our website. People are always looking to save money, and I'm trying to help them understand why that's not a great approach.
I'm sorry, so what is your question? How to overcome the mental barrier?
Yeah, have you, other than telling them stories about bad translations that have happened because somebody that's not qualified for the job is translating something when they can't?
Right. I think it's just a matter of enlightenment, of education, using some of these stats, or just to say that, and I'll show you in the next part of the way it should be done properly, the way the process should be done properly. But again, many people assume, Marie down the hall comes from there, let her do it. Mm-hmm. Well, Marie down the hall came to this country when she was 10. Does she really speak telecom terminology, whatever your industry is? And the answer is probably no. And foreigners who study in this country, study accounting or chemistry, whatever, they don't know these technical words in their native language because they're learning them in English. And so even they have difficulty. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of enlightening people that, would you take your dog to your dentist, or would you get your car repaired by your plumber? The translations is a very specialized field with very, very talented people, and you cannot assume that if a person speaks a language, he or she can translate it. It's a very, very difficult art that people study many years for, and especially again if the terminology is technical.
Yeah, it's similar to, most of my schooling was in Spanish, and when I came back to the States for my senior year of high school, I took the next Spanish, or the next math, which was pre-calculus. Mm-hmm. I had learned trigonometry and geometry and everything in Spanish.
Right.
And just making the translation between sine and seno was enough of an obstacle that I had some challenges in that year in math.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you learn in one language, and it's, you normally don't know those technical words or industry words in another.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Stephen. And one thing I would share, I was teaching English in Mexico some years ago, and to the younger elementary age and to adults in the evening. And I was also, they wanted to learn some idioms and, some of the expressions that we use, and they don't translate literally. So I know one person brought a comic book in, and he wanted us to read and translate that. And I one of the things was get off my back. So it does. So to translate that literally, it doesn't have the same meaning. And to try to convey it, it took a lot of effort. And finally had to really say, it just really means to leave me alone or, or take a step or two back, but it has nothing to do with physically being on someone's back. So there are a lot of interesting anecdotes and adages that we use that does not translate literally.
And similarly, if you put in Google Translate, I'm on the fence about if I'm coming to your party. It will literally say, I am on top of the fence about if I should come to your party. And that's not what it means. Mm-hmm. So let's move on if we could, because we've got a lot more to cover that gets into the meat of everything. Now, Caesar, next slide, please. There you go. So our company does basically everything. We're a full service language agency. Translation is anything written, interpreting is anything spoken, and everyone from the president to the press corps messes it up. So if you do, then you're in good company, but now you know the distinction. Localization is primarily to make sure that the colors, images, expressions, words, money, this is all appropriate for the target culture, the target country. Desktop publishing, of course, is layout. Branding research, this is very critical also. A lot of companies spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars going to market without the cheapest insurance possible. Check, please, if your company name, if your product name, and if your slogan translate into other languages, because often they do not. I will give you an example at the end of one that does not work. But please come to us or come to another agency just to ask to present it, to check it, to test it, to be sure that it does. We can do 10 languages for under $1,000. Interpreting. There are many ways to do interpreting, which I'll get into separately. One of the ways is called over the phone. You can do it by phone. You can do it by video. You can do it on site. We also do ASL, American Sign Language interpreting. Transcription is writing the words, say, of a video in Dutch in that native language before it's translated. And videos about, we do the transcription and then subtitling, dubbing, or voiceovers. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of the ways to do it correctly. There are 4 primary criteria. So again, we don't use amateurs, we don't use non-professionals, we don't use diplomatic spouses or your cousin who used to live there. And Stephen, thank you. I know you speak Spanish from living abroad, but although we love you very much, we would not hire you unless you have a master's degree in the art of translating or interpreting. And this is very, very, very critical. So master's degrees, these are very high level people. They must have at least 10 years continual experience, which means we do not hire professors because this is not their full-time job. People must work into their native language only to make sure that they do the nuances and expressions correctly. And most importantly, they must be perfectly matched for the subject. So these people, we form teams of translators and interpreters according to your subject, which is why we can do everything from aerospace to zoology. So if we need to do chemistry, our people speak chemistry in those languages. If they need us to speak dog food, we can speak dog food in those languages. Again, we do have subject specialties that we've done most often: healthcare, medical, pharma, manufacturing, law, and IT. But this is the way we can do it in any subject that you would give us. Next slide, please. So, and this is the process that's very, very critical. So it's basically a 4-step process. We prepare the files, and then there are 2 sets of translators. One, the initial one, the process is called TEP, translation, editing, proofing. Initial translation by a first translator with those 4 criteria. Editing, which is the second professional translator who would acculturate. For example, this would not, we have done this in the past, we don't do it now, but if something is going into Canadian French, technically you can use a Frenchman to do the first pass, the first translation, but we must use a Canadian, a Quebecer to do the second for the acculturation, the word vocabulary, and so forth. Proofreading is checking not the words, but the spelling, the punctuation, the grammar. We then do, we create a translation memory, which I will get into in a moment. We format the translations so that they match what your source file is. I'm going to use English as the example, that you give something to us in English. It can come to us in any other language for those of you who are abroad. So if you send it to us in English and it's got bold, italics, and 5 bullet points, the translations must also have bold, italics, and 5 bullet points. So we check to make sure the formatting is accurate. We then lay out the graphics. The graphics have to be formed. If you see pictures in a textbook or in a magazine, we lay out the text around the pictures. That's called layout or desktop publishing. We then do a final quality assurance review of all the languages, of all the translations together, side by side. Again, bold, italics, 5 bullet points. Do they all have the same thing? Are all the measurements converted to the same metric units, if that's appropriate? Do they all speak in the same currency, if that's appropriate? So this is what we check for, and then we maintain the translation memories. Next slide, please. Caesar, thank you. So a translation memory. Now, this is why we do not use amateurs or non-professionals, because the vast majority of them do not use translation memories and don't know what it is. So when we do a translation, we use, it's a program, or it's computer assisted translation, CAT. So let's say English is on one side and German is on the other side of a split screen. As we're translating into German, the computer is capturing what the English to German is saying, sort of phrase by phrase. And this has multiple benefits. First, it improves the translation because it does guarantee accuracy, but it also ensures consistency. So if, for example, you like to refer to your sales reps as sales associates, as many American companies do, we will use the word sales associates or customer relationship associates, whatever you want to say, and it will be consistent throughout all of your files. And when those terms repeat, then you benefit by the speed, because the computer will repopulate whatever has repeated. And it will save you a lot of time that we can speed up the process. And it will also save you money, because if something is repeated in your files, in the same file or the next file, that of course is at a major price reduction. So this is a way that we can leverage translation memories to make your projects more accessible. We worked for a small company called Fujitsu for many years. You may have heard of them. Over probably 8 years, we saved them over $500,000 because we leveraged translation memories, and they kept giving us very similar directions for use. So 90% of them were the same, just change a few words. And so we can bang them out within a few hours instead of 2 weeks as their previous vendor had done for them. Okay, next slide, please. We also do websites and software. Some of this is a bit technical, but what's most important here is the very last line, that there are 3 types of websites and software translations that we recommend. And a lot of people say, well, I can't do my website because it's not finished. Well, websites are rarely finished. They're rarely, they always need to be updated. I understand that. The issue is, what are you losing by not translating your website? And as you saw in the beginning, what the percentages were of people who will only read in their native language and who will not trust your company if the words are not in their native language, will not use you again. So there are 3 alternatives for websites. One is to do the whole website. That's fine. We'd be delighted to do that for you. But if you don't have time, you can't afford it, or you don't want to do your whole website, we can do an abridged website. An abridged website, very simply, is your contact page, your home page, your contact page, and 2 or 3 key product pages. Do something. It's better than nothing. And if you don't want to do that, then how about just writing a doc file, asking marketing people, write out a 1 or 2 page doc file about your company, who you are, your longevity, what your benefits are, your products, of course, how these benefit your target audience. And again, just like a summary, as if you would give a 1-minute elevator pitch, and let us translate these summaries into 15 or 20 languages. Put them on your website with flags, and suddenly you've got something which is much better than nothing. And again,
Absolutely.
You're showing people that you're interested in their business and you're interested in, you're contacting them to show that they are important to you and the language is not a barrier. Next slide, please. Audios and videos, we do these as well. The process is often transcribing the file if it's in a foreign language. We would transcribe it into English or whatever we're translating it into. We then translate the scripts, we insert time codes, and we could do dubbing or subtitling, dubbing or voiceovers, which are very similar terms, and subtitling. One key example, many of you have heard of the Dalai Lama, he's been a Nobel Prize winner. He's been an extraordinary human being. He narrated the only film he ever narrated about his own life. It's called The Great 14th. He's the 14th Dalai Lama. We transcribed it. Yes, he did it in English, but his Indian English his Tibetan English is quite hard to understand. So we did have a script, but we translated it and subtitled it into 21 languages. So if we are good enough for the Dalai Lama, I hope we are good enough for you as well.
The Dalai Lama was actually on last night with Desmond Tutu, and they were speaking on joy and how to maintain that in the world that we live in. So yes, if you're good enough for the Dalai Lama, certainly your skills and services are needed and good enough for us.
We hope they're good enough for you as well. Yeah, Thank you. Next slide, please. So interpreting, again, interpreting is spoken communication. Translation is written, interpreting is spoken. Interpreting is done in 2 ways, consecutive or simultaneous. Consecutive is that you're communicating with another party. Let's say I'm communicating with Dana, who speaks Greek. I speak in English, I'm quiet, an interpreter interprets into Greek. She responds in Greek. She's quiet, the interpreter responds to me in English, and it goes sort of in a triangle format like that. Simultaneous is what you see at the United Nations, where the diplomats are speaking in real time, and the interpreters in the sound booths above wearing headsets, and they interpret simultaneously as these people are speaking. Simultaneous interpreters are like brain surgeons. They're the top of the profession. It is extremely difficult to do, especially with diplomacy. This is where wars have happened, or where difficulties have happened. Certainly misunderstandings have happened. Mrs. Clinton, for example, when she was, I think yes, when she was Secretary of State. She talked to the Russians about doing a reset. There was no word for reset in Russian, so they had to figure out how to express that concept. Fortunately, it was not simultaneous, and they had time to figure it out. And interestingly, Mrs. Clinton also, when she was First Lady, led a conference in Cairo of women from around the world dealing with birth control issues or family planning issues. It was really family planning. And the word abortion came up, and there was no real word for abortion in Arabic. It had not been used for a very long time. So how does one deal with that? Interpreting can be done on site or by remote. And for legal people, we use certified interpreters. We use conference interpreters for international conferences. We did a conference in Rome for the pharmaceutical company Allergan, which it was a 4-day conference. We provided sound booths and the interpreting booths and all the equipment to translate into, we had 26 interpreters over 4 days. And of course, so we do these sessions worldwide, and we of course can do them by remote, by video, and in American Sign Language. Next, please. So the question then arises, how do you communicate when you can't speak? So I suggested, for example, that you have you put your website in another language. Well, what happens if someone contacts you from Greece or from Bulgaria or from Thailand? And I presume for most of you, your Thai is not very current at the moment, or it's not very up to date. So what happens if someone writes to you in a language you don't understand? So we have two solutions for that. One of them is OPI, over the phone interpreting. So we have a service. Now this works only through English. So if you want to do Bulgarian to Portuguese, unfortunately it doesn't work. It only works again to or from English. But this works 24/7 in over 120 languages, where just as a live interpreter, consecutive interpreter would be there, this works through a telephone interpreter. You would speak the telephone. We would give you a PIN. I'm sorry. We give you a PIN. A toll-free number. Of course, your own PIN for your own company or department as you want it. You call in. You say the language that you want within 30 seconds or less. Most likely less. You're connected with that interpreter, and you then have a 3-way conversation. You, the interpreter, your party, interpreter back to you. No subscription is needed. If you don't use the service, there's no billing, there's no risk. It's cents per minute. It's a very quick and easy way to do it, but you do need to sign up in advance for it. If you're doing writing, text messages or emails or anything else, very simple, send them to us. Send them to us in whatever language they're in. We'll translate them into English or to whatever your native language is. Write your response. We'll translate that response back into your party's language, and you have a communication that way. And these are two simple ways to solve the issue so that language is not a barrier to your doing business internationally. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. Bloopers, what could possibly go wrong? So I gave you the example. I told you in the beginning of one of the services we offer is name screening or name evaluations. So it's important to check a product name, a company name, or a tagline in another language to make sure it would work. So many of you are familiar with Puffs tissues, the Kleenex or tissues as they are. Puffs introduced themselves into Europe, and they had a major problem. And I apologize, this will sound a bit derogatory, but it is a fact. In Germany,
you hit mute, Philip.
Okay, did everyone hear that? Shall I say it again?
Say it again, please. Sorry about that.
So Puffs tissues entered Europe, and they did not quite realize that and this apologies, this may seem a bit derogatory, but it's not meant to be offensive. It's meant to illustrate a point. Ein Puff in German is slang for a brothel or a whorehouse, not a great name for tissues. And in British English, when they went into the UK, a puff is what we would call in American English a fag. And again, that's not very appropriate for a product name. Now, other bloopers happen, and I'm sure many of you have seen these wonderful signs abroad where, again, people are not using, not following the rules. And before I give you these bloopers, please put in the chat, if you remember, what are the 4 criteria for a professional translator, a professional interpreter, a professional translator, what interpreter, translator, whichever, what are the 4 rules that each one must have? Do people remember any of them? Good, hold a master's degree, absolutely right. Anyone else? Okay.
I'm sure we've got more out there. So they may not be as fast typers, but go ahead and put it in the chat, please. Yes, thank you, Stephen.
10 years, excellent, 10 years, 10 years continuous on the job as translators or interpreters. Must go into their native language only, excellent. And the 4th one, about subject. Okay, they translate into their native, their subject expertise only, okay? These are people, obviously, who did not use the rule of that they must use native language speakers. So a sign in a Bucharest elevator, a lift, said in English, the lift is being fixed. During this time, you will be unbearable. So that's one. In a Moscow hotel room during Soviet times, a sign said in English, if this is your first visit to the USSR, you are welcome to it. And that's an example of how one little preposition can make a huge difference in meaning. Mm-hmm. And finally, in a Norwegian cocktail lounge, a sign in English said, ladies are requested not to have children in the bar. Good. So, thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some of the companies that we have worked for over 30 years, but of course we welcome clients of all sizes, small, medium, large, nonprofits, government agencies, whoever you are. We love you dearly. We treat you all with the same excellent, same personal service. So everyone, we don't discriminate in any way like that. Next slide, please. And so thank you. And that is the way to contact me or contact us if you would like to do so. So
thank you, Philip. This has been excellent. And as I mentioned, we have several members and some guests on today that are doing business globally, and some that I know that are starting doing business in other countries, and cultural adaptation of what needs to be translated is key so that we're not being offensive or we're not misrepresenting our organizations as well. Remind us again, in terms of Auerbach International Translations, how many languages do you translate and what in terms of this full service offerings that you have?
We do about 120 languages. Mm-hmm. Most of our work is to or from English, but it doesn't matter. We've done Italian to Arabic. We've done Portuguese. We've got an office in Brazil, so we've done Portuguese into other languages. So the combinations don't matter. They just may take a little bit longer. But we can, whatever you've got, we most likely can do it. Mm-hmm. And we're a full service agency, so we do anything written. Again, anything written, brochures, manuals, web contracts, patents, letters, emails, and PowerPoints, social media, anything you've got. You do anything spoken for conferences, meetings, telephone calls, anything you've got. Of course, we do other name evaluations or branding, mm-hmm. Desktop publishing, and other services such as transcriptions and services that support the language business.
Excellent.
I'm sorry, and videos and websites as well.
And website. The website component really surprised me the most because I didn't think about that. I host an event in Puerto Rico and I haven't had the website converted, so we'll be reaching out to you. I want to open the floor to some questions that you may have, Philip, and Renee looks like she's posed for a question. I mean, your body language says that. So if you or anyone else that wants to go next, please go ahead.
I didn't know I was sitting in that position that said.
Yeah, you're in the I'm ready.
Yeah, listen, it's Friday afternoon. I'm ready to go out the door. No, I'm just kidding. Hello, Philip. It's nice to meet you. I think we'll probably be having some conversations in the future. I am working as an intercultural consultant, so I'm not doing any kind of translating, but there's always the misunderstandings and especially in between French and English. And just if we talk about language, my son and I actually do some translating, but just kind of ad hoc. And we get so frustrated because somebody will send us something they think is in decent English, but you have the whole transposition of the word of the sentence order. And of course you have that with German. So you can't translate by, word by word. Of course, you know that, but how do you do that with a language where the word order is so different? Do you need to have, we work the two of us together, and I think professionally, you always have two translators, as you told us. Does that give any special needs, or do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Renee. That's a very interesting question. So I mentioned translation memories. And again, amateur translators they don't have the software. It's rather expensive software. So the translation memories break up the text into phrases, segments, as they're called. And so that when the translators work, they put it, they do it in the phrases, but the phrases could be, a whole clause, for example. I like chocolate candy because, and then the second part, because it makes me fat and I like to be fat or something. So those are 2 or 3 different clauses. So within the clause, they do the proper word order. And then if they need to, again, the translators can always override the machine. The translators will put the phrase or the whole sentence into the proper word order. And we had a client at one time who made a huge mistake. They thought that they asked us to do like an Excel sheet, just translating words or translating phrases into East European languages where the word order was very, very different. And then they thought instead of using us, they could cut corners by just taking these translated phrases and recombining them. And they got furious at us because the translations were wrong. Well, yes, they're wrong because they're not in the right word order. You didn't ask us to do that. You asked us just for the individual words, basically, or the individual 2 or 3 words. And that's not the way it's done. So you're absolutely right. It has to be done as a full sentence or as it has a phrase and concept for concept. It's not word for word. It's always concept for concept and acculturating as needed.
Yeah, and if I do I have time, or you want to take another question?
You do, go ahead.
Because this is, I've had problems already with English to French, because in English, of course, we're very direct, and the French language is much more subtle. And people have been insulted by my language where I didn't want to do that at all, written language, but it came off too direct. And you, of course, have to take care of that, especially when you're working in diplomatic circles.
Right.
So, I mean, your people, they also have, I would assume, some kind of business knowledge also, so they know how that could be taken in a business context or even in a personal context. If somebody says, I mean, a perfect example, in the US, we say, hey, how you doing? Here, I want to send this to you, whatever. And in French, you say, hello, I hope you're okay. Isn't it a nice day? I would like to, it's just totally different. How do you deal with that?
Well, that's where the professional translators come in. And that's why, again, you can't use Google Translate for something like that, because again, it will be very literal. It may know a phrase or two, but it will be very literal. So that's exactly why it's totally inappropriate. So yes, the translators and the editors, because they have master's degrees, they've been doing this 10 years, they go into their native language only, and they speak the subject, will know to, when they're introducing a letter, for example, in English, we would say, hello, our dear Heinz, Joe Smith suggested that I write to you in Germany, introducing my company. Well, first of all, you would never do dear Heinz. You would say, dear Herr Schmidt, or whatever. So the translators know these acculturations and would do it automatically as part of the process to make you shine.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I'd like to at least entertain one, maybe possibly two more questions. We have full access to ask Philip anything that you may have questions around translation, starting a business in another country, and some of the other considerations. And of course, feel free to place your information of LinkedIn in the chat so we can connect with each of you and continue this conversation. Any other questions? And Tracy Leek's smile is begging to, I think she's another Thunderbird. The Thunderbirds are all lined up on my screen on the left.
Sure, that's not a political statement. It just happened that way.
Well, we're certainly happy to be affiliated with Thunderbird and have our headquarters housed there, and to know that you're in 15 countries and soon to be 30. So as Global Chamber grows, we're happy to see that collaboration grow also with Global Chamber. So any final questions that you would have?
I didn't think I was that brilliant and answered everything.
You covered quite a bit. And, the stats were alarming for me. Well, you say 40% of businesses will never do business if it's not the documents, the services, the brochures, the tools are not in their language. That's a significant market.
Exactly.
That stands to be lost is if not done in that way.
No, 72% of the world, around 72% of the world does not speak English. That's at least 3 billion people. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure most of you would like to have a small piece of that. So again, these are huge markets out there. Sure.
I would like to ask of our attendees, what's one thing that, just one, I know there was quite a few things that may have been new to those who are in the listening, but what's one thing that really jumped off the screen for you that you learned from this Globinar today about doing business and cultural considerations and what you need to keep in mind? Yes, Stephen.
I'm a slow typer, so I'll say it instead of typing it in there. Mm-hmm. Just a good reminder how many people do not want to buy from a company that can't even be bothered to put some of the basic information about their company in their native tongue. Even if they're fluent in English, as the example of most of the people I work with, hearing it in Spanish has such a big impact.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Stephen. And I see Renee, I think it was Renee that wrote that she didn't realize that OPI, let me read the question, and did not know that OPI was possible.
Right, most people don't.
So and then Dennis, you look like you were unmuting yourself. Were you going to say something?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for putting this on. This webinar is very informative. I have several presentations, PowerPoints, I guess you could call them. And one of them is in Arabic, one of them is in Chinese and different languages for my product because I sell my minerals worldwide. Is it possible that I could and I have no idea what they say because I'm not fluent in that language. I mean, they could say I'm a mass murderer for all I know. But my question is, if I sent you these presentations, can your people look at them and if they're and tell me if they're adequate, and if they're not adequate, they could go through them and make them more appropriate, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, absolutely. send us all the foreign PowerPoints, but also send us the English that you want it to say. And we can then, edit and check, proofread to see if they're accurate. And if they're not, we can fix them for you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make sure you're not a mass murderer.
Absolutely. William, I'd like to ask you if you would not mind sharing, since you are overseas doing business also in the US and other countries, would you share maybe one or two challenges that you learned and had to overcome when it comes to language, translation, documentation, websites? I would like for you to introduce yourself, tell us where you are and what you do, and you'll be our final person today.
Right. Thank you, Dana. So hi everyone, I'm William from Global Chamber Myanmar chapter. Okay, so one of the challenges that I face when it comes to translation is definitely on contracts and legal paper when it comes to cross-border tradings. So for example, one of the cases that we recently had was a trading deal with Czechoslovakia. Yeah. So the language that the contract that they would prefer reading is in Czech language, whereas the contract that we normally use is mostly in English. So we had to get some translation agencies, and then even then we still have some multiple errors in the contract, and since we don't understand Czech language, it's kind of hard for us to make sure that the points that we are getting is actually the points that they are reading on. So that was one of the challenges that we had. But yeah.
Well, that's a huge one, because we're talking contracts, things that are binding, and what the language, the verbiage that we use, we have to adhere to that, right? So
Exactly.
that's important to make sure the contract is translated properly. So,
exactly. Yeah.
And one person wanted to know, this is our final question here, and then we want to appreciate and thank Philip. Would it be possible to give us an idea of the rates per minute for OPI?
Yeah. So our listed rates for OPI start at 99 cents a minute, but we usually discount from there. For Global Chamber members, we'll be glad to do it less. And if you can give us a sense of what your volume would be, if, for example, if it's just occasional, that's one thing. But if you plan, say, 3 hours a month of talking, then of course we can discount substantially from there.
Excellent. We want to thank you. This has been so informative. It's relevant, it's needed. And what you do is from a level of excellence, and that's who we associate ourselves with in business. Excellence. So I want everyone to remember to go be global, be unstoppable. Follow us. If you're not a member of Global Chamber or you want to learn more about us, I put it in the link, globalchamber.org, and we make meaningful connections. Go and have a fantastic day. We have another Globinar for young global leaders at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I know I'll see some of you on there for sure, but the invitation is extended to all. We want to thank you very much, Philip Auerbach.
Thank you.
Auerbach International. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, and we'll see you all in another room soon.
Very good. Thank you so much.